we may think that meditation is this special practice, a kind of, for some of us, a really important practice, maybe even a little sacred practice. And there may be an assumption that it requires a very special place in order to meditate, like in a temple, this sacred space that's dedicated to the practice of meditation. And even within our ordinary lives, we may think, oh, if I'm going to meditate, I really need this special place where nobody can disturb me. And that's kind of far away from ordinary life and from the disturbances and distractions of ordinary life. And there's no question that to have a space that supports the practice is absolutely helpful. But of course, Zen is also the school that keeps emphasizing how ordinary mind is the way, and that ordinary activity is the Buddha's activity, and that really any moment is a Dharma gate, we would say, or an opportunity to realize Buddha's activity. Something like that, I mean, Zen is the school that really messes with the distinction between ordinary and holy. It's the school that vehemently insists there is no such distinction, and to set up that distinction is going to just be a real hindrance in your practice. So if you're practicing Zen, or if you're interested in this way of life, you kind of have to live with that paradox of, like, on the one hand, most people do have an experience that if you're in a retreat, practice is supported very differently, and you may have actually the possibility to really shift your perspectives or to have insights that you just don't have in ordinary life. So yes, it's true that there are circumstances for practice that are simply more conducive to the development of practice, and also very simply to just release the mind of ordinary life, such that a kind of like bigger mind, wider mind, spacious mind. My Dharma grandfather, Suzuki Roshi, would speak about big mind, that big mind can show itself. But the question then is, wait, is practice really limited to these very special circumstances? And on that one, the Zen school is super clear and says no, absolutely not. And in fact, if you set up that limitation, then you're kind of betraying the real spirit of the practice. In fact, the purpose of the practice is to turn any activity, any moment, into a moment of realization. And the biggest word we have in Zen is Buddha, and turn any moment into the activity of a Buddha. So, but again, then the question is, how can this distinction between ordinary and holy, or special and very conducive for practice, versus circumstances that are the opposite, that are not conducive to practice, that in fact further distraction, how can this distinction both be true and not true? And I would say that, first of all, it's good to have the view that it's both true and not true. In other words, to, seek, when you can, circumstances that are as conducive to practice as possible. And those circumstances are usually circumstances in which we can actually reinvent ourselves, in which we can step out of, almost take a vacation from our ordinary views about ourselves, because the thing that we're always carrying with us is us and our views. So we'll have a certain image of who we are and what the world is. The circumstances that are most conducive for practice are circumstances where those views almost like have no grip. They are not reinforced. And ideally, a retreat center does that for us. It's quiet. There's a kind of sensory deprivation. We're in a structure where just our ordinary patterns can't unfold. Like in Zen, very simply, you don't have time for them. The schedule is so strict. You just don't have time to be who you usually are. You don't have time. You're too tired for all the thoughts that you usually have. So there's a structure that just kind of like challenges and almost makes it hard for you to just automatically reenact your ordinary patterns. And also then, of course, a good retreat center is such that it's in a location where nature, the wider, I always call it with David Abram, he has this great term, the more than human world, which of course the world is more than human, but we kind of tend to forget. So a good retreat center has the presence of the more than human world. And all that is super supportive to open our minds in a much wider way, that kind of where the boundaries of our personal identity just get softer and eventually can just be forgotten. Like Dogen Zenji famously says, to study the way is to study the self. And then to study the self is to forget the self. So what is the kind of study or the kind of contact with the self that doesn't reinforce the self, but makes us rather let go and forget the patterns, the habits of self? And again, there are circumstances that do that more than others. At the same time, and that is much more the point of this video, is that we can live in a way and view the very life, whatever it is we have now, in such a way that that distinction is also completely unnecessary. And for daily life, that is a better view. So if you're practicing, what I recommend usually is, especially in the West, where most of the practitioners are living a professional life in some city or some town or whatever with families, so a so-called traditionally a householder's life, we need to actually kind of have a take or an understanding of this distinction between ordinary and, I don't know, say holy or best suited for practice. And the best, I think, is if you both can sometimes plug in with situations like with a sangha, with a practice center, or just at home with a kind of way of creating space and time for yourself that really is most supportive of your practice. So yes, do that sometimes if you're really setting up your practice, but at the same time, don't ever think that any moment or any situation could possibly hinder your practice. No moment, no situation should have that power if you're really practicing. So in that sense, the distinction is not helpful and not true. It shouldn't be that ordinary life in any way separates you from practice. If you view it that way, then you're using the distinction in an unhelpful way. So in other words, a helpful way to use the distinction is to, yes, sometimes seek places that are supportive of your practice. That's a helpful way of using the distinction. And an unhelpful way is to have the distinction somehow separate you, and almost like sometimes for some practitioners, they can start disliking. One can start disliking one's ordinary life. And if that happens, that I don't think, I mean, without knowing your personal ordinary life, but that I think is probably not helpful. You want to have a view that any moment is a perfect moment for practice, whatever it is. Especially the problematic moments are the best moments for practice. They are not the ones that separate us from practice. They are the ones that can really teach us something, because otherwise they wouldn't be problematic. Problems always, just like per se, have something to teach us. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a problem. So a core attitude that I'm trying to get across here is that the practitioner fundamentally views themselves as a learner, as somebody who is just in the world and ready to learn from it and to learn from life. So if there's a situation, we want to learn how to be in it as ideally, a version of the Buddha, our version of the Buddha. How can you be present right now as your version of the Buddha? And again, as I've said in other sessions, the Zen response to that is wholeheartedly. You don't need to be special in any way. You just need to be there wholeheartedly. So wholeheartedness is, I think, the transformative chemistry. It's the ingredient. It's almost like alchemy. It's the ingredient that changes ordinary into a Dharma gate, that changes whatever it is into a Buddha field. Just to use Zen words here, changes any situation into a Buddha field. So you don't need to be somebody you're not. You just need to be yourself, but wholeheartedly. Just all of you, fully engaging body and mind. And the feeling in that is, without promising any results or anything, but the feeling there is that the body and mind that we can trust and that can transform things is the one that doesn't divide itself. That doesn't say, oh, I'm going to only bring half of myself, but the one that brings one's entirety. So if you bring all of yourself, there's some feeling of, well, it's the wholeness that transforms. It's bringing one's whole being into the wholeness of a situation, not just into certain aspects that are liked or disliked. All of that is divided mind and dividing mind. You want to bring the wholeness of your being into an undivided world. And it's that feeling that transforms any moment into a Buddha field or into a Dharma gate or into a possibility for something really good to emerge. So, in sum, how to turn any moment into meditation is just by wholeheartedly showing up into the fullness of what's here right now. Thank you.